Hello, my name is Jeannie Shop, and I am the founder of Pathways Towards Literacy, and I am the editor and co-author of the new book, Reading Isn't Optional: Fulfilling the Promise of Literacy for Secondary Students. I had the privilege of writing 3 chapters in this text. One of the chapters that I wrote was on vocabulary, Chapter 9, titled Word-Rich Classrooms: Practices for Intentional Vocabulary Instruction. Now, what you need to know about me is I am an educator. I taught for 33 and a half years. And it wasn't until I became a 7th grade English language arts teacher, and I worked with students that had difficulty accessing grade level text and therefore had difficulty remembering, understanding, or comprehending what they've read, that I started to understand how integrated vocabulary and comprehension truly is. And so, as a secondary educator, I think it's important that we all understand the role of vocabulary in comprehension. This is a critical topic. And the text begins with a quote: "Children with better vocabulary knowledge have high reading comprehension scores concurrently and longitudinally." And that is from Jane Oakhill, Kate Kane, and Carson Elbro. So, friends, in secondary space, I think for many of us, right, because we're strong in our content areas, vocabulary was never a detriment to all of us and our understanding our content. But for a vast majority of our students, they are word deficit, and particularly in this era of technology and digital media. Too many of our kids are not bathed in a sea of strong language. And so, therefore, many of them do not have a breadth of words that they know and are familiar of because they're just in language deficit environments. And nor do they have a depth of knowledge of word learning. And the research is really, really clear, right? And I cited in this chapter that our students to comprehend, right, they need to know 95% of the words on the page. And the reality is, as Sharon Vaughn has taught me, vocabulary is a proxy for knowledge. So if there's a lot of vocabulary words, then students are going to have strong knowledge. Therefore, they're going to be able to understand what we want them to understand in the text. And so the reality is many of our kids do not have depth and breadth of vocabulary. And in writing this chapter, I really leaned in the work of Michael Graves and his work, because it's not just one vocabulary word or one vocabulary routine, right? You know, we have to build an environment of language. And so it's more than just teaching a vocabulary word or using a dictionary. And so one thing in this chapter, what it's going to give you is information on how to build a culture around words. And one thing that I think is super critical for secondary teachers to know and understand is that we can't forget our own language. The academic language that we use in our classrooms is critical, and I reference that research in this chapter. We also have to surround them with language by reading out loud to them. And I'm not talking just reading aloud the chapter, but making it intentional practice that every day for 5 minutes, we read something to them that's going to give them more word knowledge. And we forget to do that in our upper grades. Kids need to be read to every day, and that is critical. Also in this book, like, we know that kids need multiple exposures to words. So we just can't give them a word and then ask them to define it and call it good, right? What we have to do is we have to build in instructional routines in our classrooms, and they should be across the board. They should be in all content areas, right? The same instructional routine around vocabulary. And I think a lot of educators say, oh man, won't that be boring for a kid to like sit there and have the same instructional routine? Well, I don't think so, right? Because it's consistent, because we need consistent and coherent instruction. And so if we have consistency, it makes it a lot easier for our students. They know what to expect. In our reality, we need to be explicitly teaching at least 15 words a week, and we can't do that alone if we're not all doing the same routines together in all content areas. I loved this chapter. One thing I hope this chapter brings to our readers is that we have to make an intentional practice to bring instructional routines around vocabulary words. Now, we have to know in order to select the right vocabulary words, we have to really be clear about in the secondary, so it would be really, really super clear about what is the enduring understanding? What is it that I want my kids to know and learn from reading this text? What is the specific learning target that I'm going to be addressing in my lesson? And what is the success criteria? And because how am I going to measure they learned what I taught them? And that formative assessment is critical piece because if I do a backwards design model, I can identify which vocabulary words are critical that I have to work on because I can't teach them all. And then I have to teach the ones that I can through just fast mapping and quickly telling them as we go. So one thing that I work with teachers across the country when I talk about vocabulary, it's really being intentional about the text that I'm asking my kids to read, being intentional about my planning to what words can I quickly just teach intentionally on purpose, or which words so I'm going to give them multiple exposures over time in reading and writing and speaking and listening. So therefore they own those words by the end of the week. So, I truly feel that the collective of this book is going to make an impact across the country, across our classrooms. So thank you for choosing to grow with me and choosing to read and discuss this chapter with your colleagues and your schools because we can, right, make a difference in kids' lives and change their trajectories. So thank you, and I hope all of you understand the critical role that you play in a child's life and understand that reading isn't optional and we can fulfill the promise of literacy for all of our secondary students. So thank you.